million for Juan Soto.
A lot of cash for one dude.
Yeah,
And
I
he's
don't.
an okay fielder.
Yeah,
You're paying for a bat. That's a lot for a bat.
yeah. That's
Good morning, YouTubers. We're talking a little opening day baseball before we get the
yeah.
podcast rolling here. I'm sure there's plenty of Cubby fans. I like the Cubs' chances this year, man. I
Yeah.
think they're a playoff team.
I think you're right on that part. I'm just not. I guess with everything else going on, and this, you guys are getting the pre-podcast. I guess with everything else, I haven't paid a lot of attention.
Yeah,
Honestly, I've just
yeah.
been
I haven't
totally,
either.
and and I'm worried about the sport as a whole. I think so 765 million for one player in a sport that is drastically losing its impact on society, I think is
No, you got rich owners that don't care and just throw the money at these guys, especially the Mets owner is
yeah.
very good at that. All
Yeah.
right, we're going in.
All right.
You got a little pre-show there for the
Yeah.
YouTube people. Now we're going in. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. It is Thursday, March the 27th, 9:20 a.m. Central Time. I apologize for my nasalness. Springtime, I spring into allergies this time of year, and they're playing with me this morning. So hopefully you can understand me and I'm somewhat uh, audible and clear to you guys. But joined by Scott Document from The Athletic, as always. We've done this podcast for a while. We appreciate you guys listening to it. We're going to talk about, obviously, the men's basketball situation, talk a little bit about the women's basketball season coming to an end, maybe look ahead a little bit to next season, and then we'll touch on some spring football. Kirk Ferentz's press conference the other day. There was a pro day on Monday, so some football stuff going on. But we will start with men's basketball, Scott. Ben McCollum, the new head coach at Iowa. Looks like Fran McCaffrey is going to land at his alma mater at Penn. I will say I think Fran is in a good place and he's happy, which is good to hear. And so hopefully that thing comes together and gets finalized because I think it'll be good for him. As Scott knows, his brother Jack is not doing well health-wise and he lives back there, so it'll be really good. He's not in good shape from what Fran had told me. So it'll be nice for the family to be able to be back there if that comes through. But good luck to Fran. And as I've said before, I think time will heal some of the wounds here with Fran and how it ended. And hopefully, kind of like Dr. Tom Scott, he'll be welcome back and they can remember the good times when he was here.
I guess starting with that, Rob, yes. If I think the fans would welcome him back, I think they would welcome him back in the fall. It's that soon. There's not a lot. I haven't noticed from the fans a get out and don't come back type of scenario. Maybe not like Lick Lighter or whatever. Or even Alford. I think this is more of
The level-headed fans.
yeah. Well,
the fans that are grounded.
Yeah, and I would say this, that most of the fans that wanted him out have turned the page and there's no animosity. Obviously, the animosity would be on Fran's part, but he did make, $4.33 million for his buyout. So he's okay, financially, and he's at a different spot. He's wanted out for a while. You could tell he's not been real happy here. And I think overall that's probably, it's unfortunate the way it happened in the end, but it's the result that really was probably best for everybody involved. And, he's 65 years old. He goes back to Penn. Who knows how long he'll coach there? He's a young 65, I think. And he's a really good coach. I think the more that I think about his era and what he did and maybe how it didn't work as much, you shoot me down if you think I'm wrong on this, is a very entertaining style of offense for sure. However, at Iowa, it's difficult to bring in the type of athletes that can play at both ends with equal diligence and athletic ability and tenacity, because the athletes aren't good enough to do that for 30 plus minutes a game. So therefore you sacrifice one end of the floor, and Iowa always skewed to the offense. which hurt them in late game situations and quality games because they didn't necessarily have the athletes to make those plays at the defensive end of the floor. At a place like Penn, I mean, yeah, you're not going to get those athletes either. But in the Ivy League, all you have to do is beat Yale and John Poulikitis, and Kylie Feuerbach's boyfriend, beat him. But I mean, I would anticipate Fran having a really, quality run, however long it lasts there, and maybe it's 5 years in the future, or that's probably a good time. I mean,
maybe Connor comes on staff and takes over for him
at Penn. Oh yeah, I mean, if I was any school, that's what I would. If I was Fran, I would say is, look, I want my son here, and I want him to be the next head coach, something like that, or
kind of like Keno and Dr. Tom at Drake.
Yeah,
we're talking keeping on the parallels here.
Yeah, same type of situation. Winningest coach, forced out, that sort of thing. And I would say that I think Connor will be a better coach than Keno. I do.
Certainly has the potential to do that. Yes.
But would Connor want to leave Indianapolis right now?
Yeah, a lot of decisions.
You've got Jack there, so unless Jack goes to Penn, but I would say obviously academically go to Penn. Athletically, don't go to Penn. It's just kind of one of those deals.
I do look up that they do have some NIL, but it's not really a factor.
No. I mean, again, you go to an Ivy League school, basketball shouldn't be really number one. The rest of your life, which should be much more lucrative than sports, should be number one. But again, I don't know what what's going on. You may know more on that.
I haven't talked to Patrick about what he wants to do in the future. Actually, my son Alex asked me that yesterday. I said I could see him trying to play overseas. I could see him maybe getting into coaching, or just Patrick doesn't have the passion, and it's not a knock because his father and older brother are just basketball freaks. I don't get that from Patrick. Patrick likes the game. I'm not sure he loves the game.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. That you just see that he's blessed more athletically than his dad or his older brother. He's got the size, obviously. He's got, and I don't know Jack at all. So I wouldn't know how he fits in that paradigm, but
he's more like Patrick, obviously got the length and but I think his skills are even a little bit sharper than Patrick's. But
I meant from mentality. Because I saw Jack at Indianapolis after they lost, and I'm like, wow, he's really shot up, because I remember him being really little. And so
I think he's more like Connor and Fran.
Okay.
In terms of the love of the game.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I can see Patrick's, giving it a shot overseas, playing a year, maybe 2 years, and then calling it quits and doing something else with his life that's non-basketball related, whatever. But I would hope that somewhere down the road that Fran McCaffrey and Iowa can come to some sort of a conciliation, that where he ends up in the Hall of Fame. Because if he goes out like the way Dr. Tom did when he went in the Hall of Fame, and he was out on the football field, and there was that standing ovation for him, it was the loudest one I think I've ever heard for the Hall of Fame, and you could see the emotion and everything. I thought that was such a wonderful moment. And whatever you think of Fran, as whether you liked him or didn't like him as a person, whether you're frustrated by his game or whatever, he deserves that kind of appreciation. It's probably too soon now for him, I imagine, certainly for Margaret. And I think that, hopefully that can come down. And then, the other part was the other day with Ben McCollum. For him to mention Fran, I thought was big. I thought it was important, because he talked about the great coaches, and he brought up Lute Olson and George Raveling and Tom Davis, and he said, and Fran. And I thought, okay, that's given respect. And I think some of the things he said related to Fran McCaffrey in that era, it wasn't like, we need to come in and change the culture, we need to come in and do this, this, and this. No, and I thought that was incredibly classy, and acknowledges that there were a lot of aspects that weren't broken at Iowa. The relationship with the fan base, absolutely, but the relationship to the players and some of the success on the floor, that was still pretty evident. And I'm glad that that part of it seems like that's not severed in any way.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. I think Fran did a good job of kind of bringing the Iowa basketball alumni back together with events, getting them, the Chris Street stuff. That a lot of them came back from that, but that kind of grew, and he had people back to visit the program. You used to look around the arena, you saw a lot of guys sitting in the stands. They come back with their families. He did a good job of bringing that together. When Steve Alford and Todd Licklater, that was not their strength. If anything, it was their weakness. I don't think they leaned into Iowa basketball past enough.
No.
But Fran, as soon as he got hired, he had recruited Jess Settles, and he knew Kenyon Murray. He knew the history of Iowa, and McCollum is the same way. And I think it's even elevated for him because he's a fan of the program and he knows the history. So I think that part of it will be seamless. I think the basketball alumni, but they still can be loyal to Fran, but still support Ben McCollum, and I think that's healthy.
Yeah, and that's the best part. And I would say, kind of veer it into the news conference, is when you have Ben McCollum, who's from Northwest Iowa. He was born in Iowa City. His mom attended law school. She became a judge in Storm Lake. When you live in Storm Lake, you don't know what their team is, because it's closer to Iowa State, but it's also closer to Nebraska. And are you even a fan of colleges, because you're kind of far out there? I mean, let alone Iowa, but are you a Vikings, Twins fan, T-Wolves fan, something like that, and don't really care about colleges? It was evident immediately that he was all Iowa. And he talked, I mean, this is why it went from being a home run to a grand slam, is when he can come up there and talk about how his idols were Iowa players. And he talked about Montier Glasper and Val Barnes. He didn't just lean into Chris Street, but he did it in a way where you knew it was genuine. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about those players, and and of course the picture with him and Dr. Tom went on social media, and he talked about coming to camps here, having a camp in Storm Lake run by Jerry Strom. And you got to know that name if you know, and talk about winning the Hawkeye Hustler Award, and who gave him the MVP was Bruce Pearl, and said he reminds him of himself and his intensity, which of course now is like, whoa, that's a big deal. And it was then too, but when you're bringing it like that, and you're showing the receipts basically of your life and where you grew up, that builds a bridge way back. And that's something that has been missing from Iowa fans. Fran did a really good job of, I always say, of solidifying the basketball people. That's a lot of the former players, the people who are like basketball first people in Iowa City, that they'll support basketball before football. I mean, they root for them both, but but outside that kind of bubble, he wasn't real good at external relations with fans or whatever. In this case, I think that builds that bridge to the second and third and fourth tier fans that have been around and remembered the same way, But the thing that makes it even more exciting is he is laser focused on students, absolutely laser focused. I've been told, a couple people told me, look, he wants to go to all the Hawks Nest events. He wants to go there and bring his players to these events, which in turn he believes will help bring other students to those events. And he figures if he can do that, it will energize the students. And with that, I know I've talked to Beth before. She wants to put the students close to the floor. Now's the perfect time to do that. Yep. And so, move some of the people, as many people as you can, get that all kind of taken care of. But it's that grassroots approach, and then coupled with, he said, it's got to be holistic. It can't just be us. It's got to be everybody. But if you get the students enthused, then possibly, the university, the athletics department, everybody who has a key stake in this program succeeding helps elevate it too. I think that was the strongest message I got, Rob, from the other day, because I think that was the part that was most broken. On the floor, things happen. But when you talk about the the external relationship between Iowa fans and the program, I think that immediately started to seal.
Yes, and we've talked about, what can be done, by the new coach. We talked about this last week, and we've talked about it with Fran as well, in terms of building the fan base back and getting people back into Carver Hawkeye Arena. And we've also talked about the NIL and resources. So all of these things, and I'm sure Beth has thought about this a lot too, getting the students involved isn't expensive, right? You can go, you're giving your time. He's going to go to the Hawks Nest events and bring these players. It's not costing them anything. It's just they're investing in the future of the program. And those are the type of things that they're going to have to do, because this isn't like, hey, I need some gas money. Hey, we need some money for a case of PBR. You're not with your friends in college. Iowa has financial issues when it comes to men's basketball, and you're going to have to, they'll increase. There'll be people that are re-energized here, and I would expect more resources to come in, but to get to where the competition is, you're going to need boots on the ground, man. You're going to need to build this up and then hopefully win some games early to get people excited. All of those things, because the odds are against you. Ben McCollum is betting on himself, and this is somewhat of a leap of faith with his favorite program, because he knows he can't compete with Indiana from an NIL or a financial resource standpoint. So he's got to figure out a way to beat them. And all of these things are important, like you talked about with the students. It's great to hear that.
Yeah. And I think some of the things that I heard, whether it was, from him, from Beth on the side, that it's not as dire NIL wise as maybe we've discussed. Now this year it was dire.
Yeah.
But with the House settlement only a week and a half away, with what Iowa can provide, with what they're expecting, hoping, thinking that they can provide on the side NIL, that yes, they're not going to be with Indiana. They're probably not going to be with Illinois. They're not going to be with Purdue and maybe,
Creighton.
Creighton, of course. But Iowa State is good, but not out of this world, and they even have a tremendous program. It's not far-fetched that they think that they can be mid-pack-ish in the Big Ten right away. And if you can then shoot up, the students are coming and they're going to be here, then okay, wow, that's a good thing. Then if you reach out externally and you do the things that he's thinking about doing, which is going on TV shows and podcasts and radio shows, things that Fran turned down. I've had those conversations with people that, they would come to Fran in the off season and say, hey, this show wants to talk to you, this place, they want to do something with you. No, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. As we know, Fran wasn't really out there. He didn't want to do those types of things. And that costs you with your relationships and building those relationships, because even if you hear him on a radio station and he says something, maybe that, that sounds cool, but you don't have that. I think those are the things they can immediately do. And then of course there's the administrative point of things, where they've got to keep Iowa basketball vibrant. They've got to, and you have a spring game for football coming up, and handing the microphone to Ben McCollum there is a good thing to do. Just consistently keeping it in front of people and put it in a positive light as often as you can. And, they're going to have a pretty good recruit coming in. The number one, according to 24/7, the number one transfer portal pickup. And he made it clear, that he wants, at least 3 of the guys that have hit the portal for Iowa. And if he can somehow secure a backcourt of Bennett Sturtz and Josh Dix, who's listening, but who knows, if you can secure that backcourt, shit, Rob, you're at least top 10 in the country in backcourt with Bennett Sturtz and Josh Dix. And then if and then the portal is wide open now, and people are pouring in it. And if you look and you go, wow, I could play with the best point guard who's a distribute first guy who does score, one of the best shooting guards in the country, and I can go in there and play right away and play well. So I think things are building in the right direction, but as we know, it's a long path for Iowa basketball to be not just 1-year wonder, not just to be good, but you want to be consistently good and consistently important and impactful locally, the way it was when Dr. Tom was there.
Yeah, and you look at Bennett Sturtz, who I'm not sure if the NBA people thought he was going to test the waters there, but you're starting to see some more momentum there. I saw he's 35th on the ESPN big board, and I think NBA.com has him maybe 10 spots behind that. So that's just something to keep in mind as he goes through the process, because if he feels like he can get a spot in the league, and that's what his dream is. I've not talked to the kid, but I think the two-way contracts, and each team in the NBA has 3 of them, so that's quite a few of them, pay about $600K a year for two-way contracts. So just things to keep in mind. I'm not trying to start trouble or any of that, but just there's a lot to go. There's a lot to keep in mind here. And when you're thinking about, Josh Dix and Bennett's, I mean, how much money, we talked about it, Scott, this was more than changing the coach.
Yeah.
And, there's just the reality of building a roster now in today's college sports. We saw it with football, getting a quarterback. I mean, it's different than the old days. So it's more than, Josh coming back because he loves Iowa. It's, can Iowa afford what he is going to cost and then still have money left over to build the rest of the roster? These are just things that to keep in mind.
Yeah, of course. And it's difficult, in today's world. I mean, because there's no salary cap.
No.
And you may be able to pay $4.5 to $5 million, which is what I think the numbers are for Iowa, somewhere between 4 and 5, versus Indiana, which is going to be paying 12, 13, 14 million or whatever. Well, you're not going to keep up with that. It's just not going to be the case. But then again, you look at the football side of things, it's the same way. Are you going to be able to keep up with Ohio State and Michigan? You never have been able to. So there's some things that you just you just build your program and do it the right way. Well, if and I would say between Dix and Sturtz, I mean, that's a sizable chunk of your salary cap. But you know what? If you get those two, you should be able to get guys. I'm not saying take pay cuts. I wouldn't expect guys to take much of a pay cut. But if you got an opportunity to go to Iowa if you're a starting forward that's maybe at a mid-major, and you have the opportunity to go to Iowa for $600K, or you can go somewhere else, UCF, let's say, for $800K. But UCF, you feel like, is maybe not going to get to the tournament, or versus Iowa, and maybe that's too big of a number. $200K is a lot of money. $650, let's say, or something like that. That if you feel like the numbers are close and I have the opportunity to play with some of the best players in the country, not only are we going to be good, but they're going to make me good too. And this coach is really good. So you can play with that. And I
don't think they're just guys taking the highest number.
No.
And that's what you have to work with. You have to work with what Scott's saying is, we can't meet that, we're $50K short of what another school is going to offer you, but this is what we have compared to them in terms of our roster, in terms of, what we can do for you, whatever you want to, sell as your, the strengths of your program. And that's going to be part of this for McCollum. He's going to have to identify talent and maybe get guys that aren't as high on the priority list of the schools that have, because there's so many good players out there. You can find good players. You got to sign the good free agents, right? You got to be creative with your free agent signings and building a roster to get to a point where you're winning enough then you can bring more money. That's kind of where you have to get to. But I think it's that those early stages are going to be important and they're going to be difficult.
It's going to be challenging, no question. But I also look at, well, has he done anything like that before? Well, he went to scorched earth and Drake. I mean, Darren DeVries left, his son left. They only had, I think, 2 scholarship players returning. He took, a handful of players, I think 4 from Northwest Missouri State, a Division II, a school that I used to cover or used to be part of covering. And Ben McCullum was a player there back when I was there. That just shows you how old I am, but also small world. And took him, and then Bennett Sturts was a Division II player, and took him to a Division I and Drake, and they won 31 games. And if you watch those games against Missouri and Texas Tech, and the way they played, and the way they beat Missouri, and the way they competed against Texas Tech, both teams, obscene amount of talent compared to Drake. It was night and day. I compared it to like Hickory versus South Bend Central and Hoosiers. It was just, but the efficiency, the way they move, the way Sturts moves without the basketball, the way that they set things up, the efficiency that they play with on both ends of the floor, the tenacious defense, and it can definitely work. And he can definitely take a guy that is overlooked, that fits his system or fits a system that he thinks he wants to play, and make them better than what we've seen. Because how many players, Rob, have we seen that have been high 5-star types that come into the Big Ten? And it takes them, it would take them normally 2 to 3 years to reach that potential, but then they're one and done. Indiana's good about that, getting those types of players that come in and then they're good. And then you're like, Noah Vonleh or somebody like that. And then you're like, yeah, but what kind of impact do they have? Whereas if you have a veteran team like Bennett and Sturts, and if Josh Dix comes back, and if, maybe Price Sanford comes back, and then you bring in a couple of other players, and all of a sudden you've got 6 or 7 who you feel like you have a really good rotation, and they're veterans and they learn how to play the way he wants them to play. And they have, because he's bringing in some other players too. I think Isaiah Howard for sure from Drake. You could compete right away. I mean, it's not, I would compare him to maybe Kurt Cignetti at Indiana with football. I think that is almost a fair comparison to what he could do at the Big Ten level. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying it's, think about it. It's not that hard. I went through his numbers at Northwest Missouri State. His last 9 years, they won 4 national titles, actually 4 out of the last 8. But in that 9-year period, they never averaged lower than 73 points. Only once did they give up more than 65 points a game. Every year they hit more than 50% of their shots. And only once did the opponent hit more than 45% of the shots on average. And over that 9-year period, they're 253-28. And so they were efficient. They played great defense, and they scored a lot of points. He said last year, and he said this the other day, that he thought they played too slow, but that's the way they had to play to win, because you saw the talent disparity. And so when you look at that and you realize if you got more players, he wants to play faster and remain just as efficient, no reason why you can't expect Iowa to be very competitive in the Big Ten right away.
No, I think, and you said this early on, I don't think they could have made a better hire under the circumstances. When you looked at what, again, the resources were, facility wise, how you compare Iowa to other programs in the Big Ten from a resource standpoint, I'm not sure you could have done better. And I have no doubt in my mind that Ben McCollum knows how to coach and can adjust to. That's one of the most important things to me. I don't want to bring up too many bad memories, but when Greg Davis came here as offensive coordinator, he told us he was going to work around whatever talent he had, and he didn't. He tried to fit everything into what he wanted to do. That's a key part for a coach. If he can adjust to what his roster looks like and win with what he has, their strengths, that's awesome. My only, and I don't think you would disagree with this, We just don't know if it works at the Big Ten. This is the highest level, right?
Mhm.
So is he going to have the horses? Is he going to be able to get enough talent annually to be able to compete? And that's the only question right now. And it's just the puzzle of being able to rebuild and be able to get the resources and get support. It's work. It's a job. It's a challenge, as Scott said. And I'm not saying he can't do it, and I'm rooting for him to do it. I would love to see Iowa basketball fans finally be able to celebrate a trip to the Sweet 16. The one that they went to, I think I was 32 years old, as you can see. My appearance has changed quite a bit since then.
Yeah.
It will be nice. I think the Iowa fan base is basketball. Core fan base is very passionate and love this sport and love a really rich tradition at the school. I know it's not football, but there is a place for men's basketball at the University of Iowa with wrestling and now women's basketball as well. There's a place for it there. It's just where does it fit in and how does this thing all work together? Because as we've said all along, Scott, it's the pie, right? How much of that pie can you give each program? Can they get enough to succeed? And that's kind of where we're at now. And we'll see that moving forward. And I'm not saying I have hopes. I think they can do it. It's just, it ain't going to be easy. Not in this league. It's a tough league.
It's a tough league. It's a deep league. You have, I mean, out of the, you added 4 teams and 2 of them were in the tournament. Washington had a bad year, but they got a good coach. They'll be okay. USC, Eric Musselman's a great coach. He'll get it turned around. This is going to be competitive. And I would say, what Fran was able to do in the Big Ten all these years was nothing short of remarkable. This was only his second losing season in the Big Ten since the 2012. I mean, they've been at least, 500 in all those years. And the only other program who can claim a better percentage is Michigan State. And I think you're in good company there if you can do that. So how Fran was able to compete in the Big Ten is a barometer that you have to, look at, significantly. I mean, I think there's several competitively, and I think that's one. Postseason success obviously is one, and then there's a couple others beyond that. Financially is very critical for this program. Here's some of the things that I've heard that from concerns from fans and how I'm not saying spin it, but just try to look at it in a different way. Immediately, people see the slowdown, the slower offense pace that they played with. The tempo was one of the lowest in the country. And because this country goes to worst case scenario with everything, let's go with, it's another lick lighter.
There's some PTSD there. I can understand it to a degree.
Yeah.
You just don't want to go overboard.
Yeah, I would start off by saying, we both covered Todd Licklider, and Todd's biggest problem wasn't his pace of play. It wasn't his style of offense. Todd knew basketball, no question about it. But Todd being an introvert was the biggest problem by far and away, that he just couldn't communicate with people. And then when you can't communicate with people, they decide to leave. And you can't, your players can't wait to get out of here. And this was an era where, you had guys who just they were starters and you had to sit out a year and I don't care. I need to get the hell out of here. That's the way they were. That's not even the same stratosphere. No. What I would say is, okay, I know of another coach who was at a Division III who won 4 national titles, who went and had a cup of coffee at a small, I think, Horizon League school. I think that's where it was that time. A couple of years. Then, oh crap, somebody went and left and retired. We need to hire somebody. So they went inside the state, and his name is Bo Ryan, and ended up being a Hall of Fame coach, took Wisconsin not only to 2 Final Fours, 1 championship game, but built them into a program of which they had never been. Because it's hard to remember this if you haven't been around, but pre-Bo Ryan and probably pre-Dick Bennett too, to that matter, Wisconsin was wasteland of basketball, had 0 tradition other than like a 1941 they went to the title game or something. I mean, it was nothing. And now you would never know that because of this. Same thing with football before Barry Alvarez, but that that's the kind of thing you can think of with him. Is Bo was methodical, no question. He played semi-slow down basketball, but he was more efficient. Defense was critical with him. And you look at the games that they won and the championships that they won in the Big Ten, they were the ones forcing the action. I mean, one of the things that Ben McCollum said is kind of his motto is impose your will on everything, in every aspect. And, you start talking off the court, I'm like, all right, that's a bit much. But if you can do that on both ends of the floor, that's the way Bo Ryan's teams played. Yeah, they didn't have great talent necessarily. I mean, Frank Kaminsky was a developmental superstar. He was 275th ranked, or 247, because I remember that because I was writing that in my Big Ten story. He was the 247th ranked player in his class for my 247, and became the National Player of the Year. Yeah, guys like Josh Gosser, and only Sam Decker was really the only high, 5-star. And the reason why he is he's local. He's from Wisconsin. So that's the kind of thing you can envision, which is, and the smart thing that Iowa hasn't done ever in basketball is you've got a coach now who pushes the right buttons, figures out what tempo to play at that best, helps his team win, which is more of a football philosophy. It's like, okay, we don't have the horses to run against this team, so we're just going to slow it down, frustrate them, and get the best shot and move there. Or, hey, we got it. Let's run with it. I think he's capable of doing that. So I'm not trying to spin this into some sort of pro Ben McCollum, but in some ways, maybe it comes across that way because I think it's exciting. I think it's a new era. I think it's somebody who gets the past, who gets Iowa first, gets Iowa fans talked about, hey, this is God's country, knows that if you go to the store and you see somebody, you need to say hi, stuff like that. That's something that Iowa, Fran did some really good things. But was he approachable like that? To an extent. Licklider, no. Alford, no. It hasn't been since Dr. Tom that I think Iowa fans feel like they have somebody who really is like them. And that can build a special relationship, especially if the success follows. It's just going to be a matter now, Rob, as we know, how much support can you give them? Not only financially, but promotionally, because they have been the worst in the Big Ten by far and away for a long time in promoting basketball, men's basketball.
Yeah, that's got to be all part of it. You've got to, you got to compensate for where you have shortcomings, which right now is NIL. So you have to massage other areas that can help you get to a point where you can get more money in there and then you can get more players. It's all part of that process because we heard it when Dr. Tom was replaced. It was the famous line, and we're still waiting to get to the next level. Fran got basically Iowa back to the Dr. Tom level. So that's the level. That's the level that for however long that's been, 40 years, something like that now, whatever. That's what Ben McCollum has to get above. Because if he gets back to where Fran was at his height, he'll get people back.
Yeah.
But then the apathy will set back in if there are no Sweet 16s and postseason success and things like that. So that's really the challenge because it's not like when Hayden Fry took over the football program, or when Fran took over for Licklider. Things are the difference now with Iowa basketball is resources wise, whereas when Fran took over, there wasn't NIL, but he had to rebuild everything and build everything back up that Licklider tore down. So that's the challenge. Can they get Iowa basketball to, I'm not saying necessarily well, you just described Wisconsin getting with Bo Ryan, but at least get above where Dr. Tom and Fran had it.
Yeah. And, and here's the kind of the history lesson, because people of our age group look with great nostalgia of that period, and rightly so. Since 1988, Dr. Tom's second season that they got to the Sweet 16 and lost to Arizona, They've made one Sweet 16 since then. So we're talking 37 years, one Sweet 16. And that year just happened to be they were a 5, they beat a 4 in a second round game. They won to beat Arkansas. Great game, great season, but that's not the type of season that you want to say, wow, that's the great one. That's just one that should come with semi-regularity at a place like Iowa, because it comes with regularity just about everywhere else. I would say this, the one difference that down the stretch of Fran's career and versus the majority of the Dr. Tom years, because from after year 2 until the final, his era, Dr. Tom's era, was almost equivalent to Fran's after year 2, because with him, I don't judge him on his first 2 years, because he was left with, and it's such a different era. There was no transfer portal. There was no NIL. You couldn't just go and get a team the way like TJ Otzelberger did at Iowa State, after Steve Prohm went 0-18 and 222. But the difference was that I feel among Iowa fans that from the late 80s through the mid 90s, closer to the end, that Iowa fans felt like when they got to the tournament, that they had a chance to do something great. The Iowa fans probably after Utah, Woodbury, Gazelle, from that moment on, Iowa fans hoped, but were a little bit skeptical that they could do something great. And then the postseason kind of confirmed that, with losing to Oregon and losing the 5-12 and all that stuff. So it was kind of this era where in Dr. Tom, they still thought, yeah, I think they got a chance to get to the Sweet 16 or get, maybe if things fell right, the Final Four. Versus Fran, you're kind of like the negative side of, I think it's not going to work out. We can't play defense. We can't, so is it more of a negative mindset now versus then? No question. But I think
some of that's cumulative too. Just how long it's been since the Sweet 16. I think eventually it's just like, I'm not falling for this again.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I think with Dr. Tom, even when they had, their problem was their seeding a lot of times, that they were at 8 or, that Andre Woolridge, and they were a really good team. I mean, that was really unfortunate. They were second in the Big Ten, and I think they were at 8, and they were playing Kentucky, which won the national title. And that was a team that, of all of them, that, the post, BJ era, whatever, I think that was probably the one that, if they had a right seed, could have gone at least in the second weekend, if not a little further into, late second weekend. So, and then, then the cumulative effect really took root when, they're a 2 seed with Luka and Jordan Bohannon and all those guys, and then they can't, and then they lose to Oregon. And then the next year you win the Big Ten tournament with Keegan Murray having an awesome, and then you lose a 5-12. It's just like, I think that was the moment when fans said, I'm throwing my hands up. I'm done. I just don't, it's not going to happen. I'm not.
Yeah. The jubilation of winning the Big Ten tournament and sucking people back in. They're like, okay, maybe this is the team.
Yeah.
And then boom, one and done.
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's another log on that cumulative fire of disappointment. That's just, eventually it just becomes really hard. So now you've got the new guy. He's got energy. He's bringing it. He's, re-energizing the program. What can he do? Can he get it to a point where people are all in again?
Yeah. And I would say that from casual conversations, I can't just say everybody feels this way, but I think there is a heavier, oh, cool. I'm excited again. I'm thinking about it again, which is actually a plus to this where we are right now. So I would say that, going with that type of a line, that's something that, by the way, the Fran news became official just now, so I'm getting popped.
Congrats for Fran.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I would say that there's more of a heavy interest right now, and people are going to give him a chance.
It's an opportunity, right, Scott? Iowa has the opportunity. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah. And it's not only getting players, which will keep them in the news. It's not only doing radio interviews, podcasts, TV shows, newspaper one-on-ones, all those types of things that keeps them in front of people's eyes and ears. Then it's continuing to expose the program in a positive way. And if you can do that, yeah, you're going to get more season tickets. If you can do that with the students, which is really where you need to hit first, and then get more season ticket sales. And then conversely, right after that, you go with, to try to entice people who didn't ignored you or blew you off to say, give us a chance. And maybe they buy a couple of tickets. Maybe they go to a couple of games. Maybe the people that only went to a couple games go to a couple more. And that's how you build it. And then hopefully for Iowa that you get close to the Big Ten season and maybe you're looking like a good team or you're playing well and the coach is radiating that energy, because Fran did a really poor job of that in press conferences. He was very monotone, especially with local media. It just didn't come across very well. So I think having more exposure in a positive light, and then if you beat Iowa State or something like that, that'll go a long way. And by January, when football is in the rearview mirror, then you can really kind of take it over. I think that's fair. And it's still going to take time, and it's still going to take consistency of the program to build it to where that true baton that we experienced in the 80s and 90s and before that even, where it went football fans, basketball fans. It was one and the same. And if he can do that and win at a higher level than Dr. Tom or Fran, then he's looped. And that's different because, Ralph Miller was a great coach. Obviously, Lute was the best coach Iowa ever had in this sport. He was better than Fran or Dr. Tom. And if you can get to that level, then you could see, all right, the sky is the limit. There is potential to reach the third weekend, which of course Iowa hasn't done since Lute was the coach.
We shall see, and we'll talk a lot more men's basketball moving forward here. As Scott just mentioned, the news came across Fran McCaffrey, officially the new coach at his alma mater, University of Pennsylvania in the Ivy League. So good luck to Fran. Let's take a break now, and we'll come back and talk a little women's basketball, put a bow on that season, look ahead a little bit, and then dip a little bit into spring football. We won't go heavy yet, but we'll hit some of the headlines from Kirk Ferentz's press conference on Wednesday. Guys, support for this podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side. Hang tight. And we're back. Switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch, right here in Iowa City, can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Perez Brothers owned and operated, formerly of El Banditos. Perez Brothers Tacos. Great location, downtown Iowa City, a little bit off the straight downtown Iowa City, but Black Angel Restaurant, live music on the weekends, great food. Check them out. Black Angel Restaurant. All right, Scott, let's dip into not the way the Iowa women's basketball team wanted to end the season with a blowout loss in the second round of the NCAA tournament, but I think as time goes on and people look back at this season and just put it into the context of all the things that were at play here, what they lost, trying to work a new star into the system, new head coach, all the things considered. They won 11 of their last 15 games. And really, that last game against Oklahoma was the stinker. They played tight with everybody else. That just was it almost seemed like an aberration. It was surprising to me.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate that the ending that they had is one that people will remember. I hope that's not the case, but we know that will be the case for a lot of people. They played poorly in every area. I mean, the first number other than the final score, which was horrific, it was rebounding. I mean, when you lose by more than 30 and you get rebounded by out rebounded by more than 30, guess
not a
what?
mystery. It's not a mystery why.
No. You had 20 turnovers. Really outside of Lucy, the scoring was Kylie Furbach, I think, had a decent game, but other than that, it was just not the ending. And that's probably, I would say, the way that most of the players and coaches probably feel is like, it sucks that we lost. You're on the road. You're at a good team. You know that's a scenario that's probably expected. That's why they're the host seed, and but you probably are most disappointed that you didn't give yourself an opportunity to really compete. There were a couple of moments. Again, you got to parse this, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, because when you lose by 34. You lose all benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's not the officiating. It's not the environment. It's just you didn't play well enough.
Yeah. There were a couple of moments, though, that I think where the momentum shifted based on calls that didn't necessarily go their way. And I think one was at 10-4. Kylie Furbach gets called for charging. I didn't think it was a charge, and she has a layup that's waved off. And the announcing crew had no idea what was going on, which was pretty much par for the course. I think that was about as bad of an officiating or announcing crew and officiating crew that I've seen in a while. They needed to sublease some BTN people once in a while, I think, over at ESPN. But that was a key one. I think when Hannah Stolke got called for an intentional foul on a reverse layup, oh my God, what are you doing? I mean, if you're going under the basket, you've got it. It's natural. You're not going to go keep your arm here. So I think Reagan Beers, get your face out of her elbow. She didn't swing it. If you swing it, that's yes, get dinged. But when somebody's going up like this and your face hits this, and I think the way she went down and cried her eyes out, and that was really impactful there. But I just thought, again, that turned out to be a momentum swing, because I think they cut the deficit to 9 on that play. And then it turned out Oklahoma shot a couple free throws, hit a 3, and then went from 9 to 14 right after that. And then, the other one, and this is what landed Jan Jensen with a tech, was, I think it might have been Beers, like hip checked Hannah Stolke, like when she was driving, like, really threw herself into her, and the ball kind of squirted out, and no foul was called. And then, Oklahoma picked up the ball, and that was, the game was out of reach at that point. But then Jan gets her tee, and I'm like, yes, you need to get your tee on this one, because it was really bad. And, one of my current and one of my former colleagues, Chantel Jennings and Nicole Auerbach, wrote, based from last year on, about the horrific officiating in women's basketball.
I saw that story. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I will.
Yeah. And used all these examples. And the LSU Iowa one was part of it. And it was, to me, it was really a great example of the inconsistency. And Oklahoma got called for fouls too. And again, this does not mean that Iowa would have won or anything like that. Don't take it as that. I'm taking it as get better. Iowa should have lost by 22, not 34. And it was really just, I think, Oklahoma played fantastic, and congratulations to Jenny Baranchek, who deserves all the flowers in the world. She's done a really good job there, and her wearing 52 pins for Jamie K.B. Lang, really an incredible gesture. and what a wonderful person. And if she was Iowa's coach, I think she'd be celebrated too. And if it wasn't for Jan, I think she might be. But I guess it just kind of makes you feel better when you can complain about a few things like that.
It was a good season. I think, again, taking into consideration all the factors, everything that went on, from 2 national championship games in a row to losing, generational talent and a lot of the most memorable players in program history. But now you get that year out of the way, and now you go into year 2 of Jan Jensen. Obviously, you lose Lucy Olson. That's a big loss. And then, you lose O'Grady's done as well, right? Addison O'Grady's done. So, there's plenty to replace, but there's a lot coming in. It's going to be a very young roster, but I did catch after the game, it wasn't on the side, I think, with Jan. She did mention getting players out of the portal. So what you know now about the roster may not be what it looks like. I think Iowa, I talked with Pat Hardy Tuesday. He was on the mailbag with me. We were both in agreement, kind of a stretch 4 maybe, or a wing scorer, somebody who can, 3-and-D type player on the wing. I think that would help this roster, because if you look with Aaliyah Guyton and Addie Deal, you figure you've got 2 competent combo type guards. What can Fearbox back? I really think if they can address having a scoring wing, that might be the piece that this program could use.
Yeah, I think if you can find a 3-point threat is really, because Caitlin obviously was that. I mean, that and more. And Taylor McCabe could be that, but she led the team in 3-pointers, and she did a nice job in the backcourt, but could she be something bigger in the future with that? I think that's another question that I think needs to be addressed. I think a stretch 4 is you're right on in that. I think
you got a lot of guards, right? Stremlo's a guard.
Yeah, Stremlo's a guard.
I guess
Houston.
Keegan Mullaney can kind of be that 3-and-D. I think. Hopefully she took a lot out of this season, because I think the talent is there.
Yeah, and also Feuerbach is a 3-and-D player.
Yep.
And she's, on-ball defender. She's maybe even a little bit better potentially than Gabby Marshall was in that role. Maybe not quite the 3-point shooter, but she is, she's a little longer. I think she's a little quicker than Gabby was. And coming back for her 6th year, that's a pretty good spot for her. What are you going to do in the post? I think that's interesting. Are you going to try to make Hannah Stolke again a power forward, or are you going to keep her at the 5? Kind of that worked this year, but Ava Hayden got really good at times. You got Layla Hayes coming in. How much is she going to be able to play? You got Journey Houston. You're going to have a very competitive backcourt because Taylor McCabe, why should she go anywhere? She started, granted, you need somebody. More than anything, I think you need somebody to replace what Sydney Falter brought and what Lucy Olson brought. You don't have to replace it exactly the same way, because Lord knows nobody could replace what Caitlin Clark brought. You're just not going to get that. And Lucy Olson may be a little bit different too. But can you get somebody to have the same impact, maybe in a different way? And who's going to be your point guard? Is it going to be Aaliyah Guyton? Very shows a lot of talent, very inconsistent. And sometimes I felt she needed to play within the system a little bit better. I thought she pressed, but I also thought that she did a little bit more than she probably should have. That she forced up some shots because she, and not really through the system. I thought she needs to do a better job if she wants to be the point guard next year. Addie Deal, you don't recruit a 5-star and expect him to sit, and she's not going to sit. Are they going to go 4 guards and have Taylor McCabe in there? And then also, Kylie Feuerbach, and then Hannah Stolke in the post, because Hannah's going to start, or are you going to trim that back by 1? And who's going to be the point guard then? And, but those are good problems to have, because as you said, Taylor Stremlo, Tegan Malini is back. You have, so there's enough players there that I think,
Kelly Levine too in the backcourt from
yeah,
Solon. She was a freshman this year. The best part of freshman, Scott, is what?
when they become sophomores.
Yeah, so, and that's what you hope for Aaliyah Guyton and Taylor Stremlow and all the other freshmen that got a chance this year, Ava Hayden, that they can make a big jump from freshman to sophomore. That's what they're going to need.
Yeah, exactly. So I expect him to have a nice jump. And I think to put a bow on this season, Rob, and if there is one unfortunate part of it is that all winter they were the number one topic we've had, when it comes to Iowa sports since football kind of concluded.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark Gronowski signed with Iowa. And they've been number one until the Big Ten men's tournament, when we started to see things were going in that direction with Fran. And then when he was fired, that became topic number one. And it's understandable. Yeah. It is a high profile sport when it becomes one, especially. And I think what we looked at was like, crap. They kind of became a footnote to some extent. And then Saturday, that when they won and they looked very impressive doing it, and okay, they're kind of building out of that. And then by Monday, the Ben McCollum news happened, they lose. And so now they kind of go to the foreground a little bit. And that said, they're not going to fall too far. There is too much interest in this program, and that's an awesome thing to see. And even if Ben McCollum rises the program, this is the one thing that I disagreed with people. Maybe I'm in the minority on it. Is a lot of people are saying, well, the women's program took fans away from the men's. I don't think that was the case, except for maybe about 15 to 20%, which is a lot, I suppose. But Iowa women always had a hardcore group of fans. And I thought they brought in an additional hard group of fans, like people like my wife, people who didn't care, barely paid attention, to now paying attention and buying tickets. And they wouldn't necessarily do that for the men's team. And then you see the engagement with the younger people, the girls. And that's again, a women's basketball thing. I think that's awesome. They may lose, 15 to 20% of their fan base just because they don't have Caitlin Clark again. But I don't see them going to curtains ever, or at least, as long as they're competitive. And so people will still write about it. People will still talk about it. There's still a very intriguing group of young women that I think captures the minds and attention of people. And finally, there's been a lot of transfers, and there will be, and there is going to be a quarterback this year that's going to be really, really important. But Lucy Olson, has there ever been a more fun 1-year player, a player that really kind of touched the hearts of fans like Lucy Olson, especially the last couple of months? Great personality, smile on her face. My only regret, and it's not just because what she could do on the floor, but my only regret is we didn't get to see another year of her, because I think she just brightens everybody's day. And that's really kind of sad to see.
Yeah, and she didn't walk into an easy situation. I mean, she stepped into some big shoes, and I think she struggled with it early. But to their credit, they worked it out and got the best out of her when they needed it. And again, to compare the women's and men's program, the women's program is in better shape financially against its peers, against its competition, than the men are. They were able to go out and get Lucy Olson, which gives me confidence that if they do it right, they're going to be able to go out and get another piece or two in the transfer portal this offseason to put them right back in the hunt again in the Big Ten. And it's a tough conference, obviously, and awful news about Juju Watkins.
Yeah.
That's a killer for the sport. And then more micro, the Big Ten. But there's so many good programs in the Big Ten that Iowa doesn't have a chance to kind of exhale and take a break. They got to keep pushing here, but I think they have the resources to do that.
Yeah, they do. And they have the resources and the interest, and let's face it, it's not going to be the same type of financial investment you don't need to make in women's basketball. It's just the nature of the sport. It's not
For
because for now, but I mean, it'll grow, but then the men's will grow too.
Yeah.
That's not going to stay the same. But I think, again, what we're seeing is, a program that's strong. It's a brand. if anything surprised me the most over the weekend, it wasn't even a loss. It was the fact that they had to play at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But
On Monday.
yeah, on a Monday. But at the same time, I'm like, all right, they had UConn and USC in prime time. I guess I kind of get it. But
Yeah.
but they're not going away. They're gonna be competitive. And this was when you have Lauren Betts and you have Juju Watkins and Kiki and both Kikis out in California, you're gonna, I mean, they're the best teams in the league. But next year, Iowa, Juju will be back, hopefully sooner. I hope she's back and healthy as soon as possible, and really wish her, because she is.
If you look at Aaliyah Guyton, I think tore her ACL roughly around January of last year, and she got back. It took her a little bit, but so this is March. You're probably looking mid-season for Juju.
Yeah.
Best case scenario.
January.
Yeah.
And even then you have to be careful.
Yep.
That was a tough.
Sucks.
I don't know if you watched that game, but
I did.
It was physical. Wasn't quite as physical as West Virginia, Iowa last year, but it was in the same vein. And you had a team, and I could see Lindsey Gottlieb being very, very upset after a while, because Mississippi State knew where it was in the place of the world, and it wasn't in USC's bubble. And it decided to kind of play a style of basketball that wasn't good for them, wasn't good for the sport, and it got a little bit careless. And I wouldn't blame that on Juju's injury, but I think throughout the game there were some cheap shots, and I thought that you need to curb that. And back
to the officiating? If you're going to invest in this sport, if you want to grow this sport, you have to address that issue.
Absolutely. It's just I don't know where they're going to have to do more. They're just going to have to do more with this. And the WNBA is bad. The women's basketball is bad. Let's just call it bad. It's not good. I mean, we complain about men's basketball officiating, which can be inconsistent. But but when you go, I don't know if but you watch an Iowa women's game, and then you watch take any men's game, it's night and day. I mean, the officiating is so much better. Even when you complain about calls, or they missed that one, or I can't believe this. No, it's a completely different realm, and it needs to change. Period.
Yeah, no question. Time to address that. It's past time to address that. We're going to address a little spring football here. We'll have time to talk women's basketball here into the offseason as they navigate the portal and get into their off-season training and things like that. But we won't dip a lot into this because we'll have more time next week once we have players and things like that, Scott. But there wasn't much newsiness coming out of Kirk Ferentz's press conference on Wednesday to kick off spring football. I found the most interesting things were his comments on John Nestor, which were, you could tell there was some frustration there on the timing of John Nestor's decision to go. One less guy in the competition, so to speak.
Yeah.
Kirk doesn't throw guys under the bus, but he lets people know how he feels about things like that. And you probably have more insight on what happened there. I mean, if I'm just looking at it from somebody who's not on the beat anymore, I don't know if Nestor got a look at the depth chart and he was not a starter. I don't know what happened there, but I'll let you fill in if you've got anything on that.
Yeah, I think and from what I've gathered a little bit, and I could be wrong, but NIL might have played a little bit of a decision here, that from what I talked to one person about it, who's not a direct source, so maybe I shouldn't mention it too much, but potentially that some of the other DBs might have gotten a little more money. And then that, if that's right, that's what you're going to face. I mean, hey, and that's the real world too. If you're sitting next to somebody in a cubicle and you think you're just as good as they are, or you're better than they are, and they're making more than you are, you're going to find another job. I mean, it's just the way the world works. And so that could be part of it. If not, it's, probably maybe he is looking at the depth chart and saying, I can't believe I'm going to be number 2 going into the spring. I should be number 1 somewhere. And based on, and that could be a cash, or it could be at corner. I mean, with Lee and Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall being back, maybe they were going to be the starters at corner, and maybe Cohen Entringer was going to play that Sebastian Castro, Dane Belton role, Amani Hooker role, which is strong safety and cash type of thing. And maybe he wasn't going to be able to get that position. That I don't know. I'm only speculating, but yeah, I think there would be some aggravation that right on the eve of starting practice, spring ball, that you're not here. And so that, to me, that leads me to think that it's not about the depth chart. That it's because you have the opportunity to go out and prove yourself over the next 4 to 5 weeks, that you're deserving of it. It tells me that it's external, which is probably NIL, which is what I was told. So if that's the case, then yeah, you know what? That's the world you live in. And Iowa has the opportunity to go out and find somebody else in the portal to replace him. The other thing I thought that was kind of interesting along those lines was about Ben Keeter. And we saw his social media post, which was that he was, now on to football. And it sounds, I think he jumped the gun there, Rob. I think he didn't have the conversation he needed to have. And it is a different world now. And when you were talking about 105, I mean, before it was unlimited.
Yeah, when he made the decision to walk away from football and just concentrate on wrestling for a year, at that point, the door was open to come back, because it wasn't down to 105. It was the old roster limits. And then when they found, now things have changed.
Yeah, this next year is the first year where they're down to 105. I mean, they've got to cut people who've invested themselves in this program.
Yep.
And so,
and Kirk said basically they were open with everybody and they had a choice. And he said some guys don't have guaranteed roster spots, but they're going to fight for them this spring and summer.
Exactly. And looking at, I think the depth chart, I think I counted, I have it listed here, dang it. 20, I want to say they're at like 110-ish right now, something like that, because they've trimmed. And and I thought Kirk handled that part of it better than most coaches, which is back in December, he was completely transparent with players. Yes, go to the bowl game with us, do whatever you want, but we can't guarantee you a spot. And so we saw a lot of players who got FCS opportunities. Some, like Johnny Pascuzzi, got he wasn't under scholarship at Iowa. He gets a full ride from West Virginia, a Big 12 school. That's great. And I thought that he handled that well. And then there are others who are still there that are, hey, that's what football is all about, is competing. And so they're going to compete this spring, and who knows what the other attrition is. And maybe they'll have a spot in their area, or maybe they'll have to leave, or maybe somebody else gets hurt in another school. And it's like, hey, you know what? This MAC school has some openings. You might want to investigate that. And I think the coaches have been really good with helping those players find landing spots. But getting back to Ben Keeter, to have the expectation that now you can just walk over and start playing football again, it's not the way it works. And I think Kirk, talked about, there were 3 dominant heavyweights and 3 guys that were 8-year veterans versus rookie free agents. I think he's got a great opportunity in front of him there. Not that it doesn't here, but it's a real challenge balancing 2 sports. So we'll wait and see what happens. So
it almost seemed like Kirk was talking to Ben through his press conference yesterday, saying, just look at the circumstances here. Stevenson, Kurt Vliet, Hendrickson, it's going to open up wrestling, and that's your sport. I think you can really do some big things there, because you know what? We only have 105 roster spots.
Yeah,
and it's just student athletes wanted NIL, they wanted compensation. They get compensation now, but with it becomes more of a business than it already was, and now it's NFL. We go into training camp. We got 53 roster spots. Who's going to get one of the spots? Now you go into camp, as Scott said, they're over the limit, at least now in the spring. Who's going to win one of those 105 roster spots? Maybe Peter can go and try to do that, but is that the smartest move for him?
Right. And, Kirk brought up, it's a long, grueling wrestling season. He went all the way. He ran the race all the way to the last day. He got, what, seventh? Was seventh
and you can see the improvement. He got better.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And, maybe some of us were naive, including myself, to think that he'd walk over there and be dominant and, kind of like Spencer Lee was, but that's a different weight class, and you just can't do that.
And it was unique too with Stevenson coming back, and I don't know, Henderson's not as old, I don't think, and Kurtvelit I think is normal, but it's very unusual, I think, to have three guys that good at the top of your weight class.
Right, and he was only a redshirt freshman.
Yep.
And then you look at. What are your opportunities in football over there? I mean, I know this is what happens a lot of times when somebody has a kind of a bigger image than their production at this level, that I've gotten hit by it. I'm sure you have too, a lot with, well, what about Keeter? How does, now that is he going to start or something like that? I'm like, in my eyes, he starts out as the 9th best linebacker, if that's the position he wants to play again. Because the 5 linebackers, they brought in 3 last year and 2 this year that are in there in the spring that already enrolled, are elite effing athletes. They are really good, and they're gonna be good. And then you have 3 other starters, guys that have waited their chance. Jaden Harrell, Carson Shire, Jackson Rexroth, and then you have other guys like Van Kekerix, and who's really ascended, and so there is Jaden Montgomery. There is a deep pool at that position.
And all of those guys went through last season, and Ben did not.
Yep. It went through the winter football conditioning.
Yep.
I've thought this since day one, based on his size and abilities, the defensive line is more in his wheelhouse.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's something he could do there. But, what is the hallmark of Iowa's defense? It's a 2-gap scheme. Perfection in technique.
Yep.
That's why they're good. It's not that they have guys. It's because they know how to play the technique. I can talk to offensive line coaches for years and offensive linemen for years who play against it. And that's the thing that they reference more than anything else. Yeah, they're ass kickers, but it's because their hand placement is perfect. Their steps are immaculate. They get to the hole in ill humor. And then they finish every single time. Or if they're a 2-gapper, they stop the double team and allow other people to make. That's what he needs to do, and that's the techniques. And now I understand, you need to get him into spring football ASAP if he wants to do that. But you also need to recover from your wrestling season. And, and again, then there are other people there that have gone through the same thing. And is he as good as they are? That remains to be seen. So, if my account of this whole thing is that Kirk is probably talking to Tom Brands already, and he's probably going to have a conversation with Ben Keeter after all those comments and say, let's not do anything this spring. Let's see what happens with the roster. When we get to June, or late May or something, we can have another conversation. If you're still up for this, if you think this is what's best, if we have a roster spot available, then we'll put you in summer conditioning and let you go through it that way. But I also think he was basically saying, you're in the wrestling army now. Why don't you just work on that?
Which may not be bad advice. And I know sometimes it's tough to, we saw it with Brody Brecht, we saw it with Connor McCaffrey. It's tough. And wrestling and football, difficult as well. We saw this year, being a linebacker weight does not transition well to wrestling heavyweight. It would make more sense if he was he was an edge or a defensive end and wrestled heavyweight, but he hasn't played that position before. And, there's a lot that goes into learning technique and being physical and being ready to play that position. So we'll see. And One more thing on the John Nestor situation. Things did not work out well for his dad in West Branch this year. I don't know if that played anything into it, but that did not go well and did not end well there. I won't go into any more than that because it's a high school situation, but that was something I wanted to get in there as well, that did not work.
Yeah, exactly. That was I'd heard the same thing. You probably know, I'm sure you know a lot more than I do on that. But it's tough when you replace a legend, and especially at the high school level, and I think Butch Peterson qualifies as a legend at West Branch.
Oh yeah,
one of the greatest high school coaches of any sport in state history. I love Butch. I love the guy, and it hurts that he's not there. But to replace somebody like that in a community where he is so well entrenched as the leader of the community in all facets, it's very difficult, especially if you're not from there or you're from a different spot, and other things didn't work out. It's tough. So I imagine that may have a role too, and so anyway, it's unfortunate that it worked out the way it did, but I think Nestor could have been could have had an opportunity there, but it also means that look at it on another level, that they have a lot of faith now in Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall, that they've had their ups and they've had their downs. They haven't played great throughout their careers, but now they have a chance to take it to a higher level. And they get full. Last year you had Jamari, and you had a kind of a competition. Now they can become the starters. Let's see what their confidence brings, because over the course of Bill Parker's career, he's done pretty well with guys that have worked through the system. Give him some respect on that.
Yeah, and just to kind of segue, the unfortunate illness and premature passing of Butch Peterson, I wanted to mention, I didn't remember to do this on Tuesday, but friend of mine, Iowa native, was working in San Diego. Bryce Miller, he was my sports editor at the Press Citizen. He was the sports editor and columnist at the Des Moines Register. Then he was in San Diego. He passed away in the last week. Really tough. Had my big cry when I was up in Minneapolis, but choose to remember Bryce the adventurer. He was always up for an adventure, man. And he hosted me on my recruiting visit here for the Press Citizen when I came out from New Jersey. And what that entailed was pretty much introducing me to every bar in downtown Iowa City. And I remember the next morning having to go to the airport and drive back to New Jersey, and I had the hangover of my life. And that was one of the memories, but spent a lot of time with Bryce, and it sucks. We lost Steve Batterson a couple of years prematurely. It just, for us old dudes in the media, Scott, it kind of puts into perspective to, I know it's an overused term, but just appreciate life, because those guys did.
Yeah, they did. That was, the losses are just devastating, and to be 56 years old, and and I didn't work with him directly. I knew him, and we were Facebook friends, and we talked and communicated and saw each other, talked and stuff. And I remember when I was in Missouri, probably about 2005, I really wanted to work it back in Iowa, and didn't get an opportunity at the Register. But one day he's like, "Hey, why don't you just come up for a day?" And so I went up, some afternoon, and just hung out, talked to him, just trying to kind of get a feel for one another. And, so I respect that for sure. And then just getting to know him over time. He was a very strong, very tough sports editor. And I think people understood that. And, of course, sports editors can't be nice to everybody and nice all the time. But he did a great job there. And then, switched over to columnist, and you never saw him in a picture without a fish, it seemed like, or, on vacation. So just a tremendous person. And just, too many people are going too soon, and you hate to see it.
Yeah, it's tough for us old dudes in the journalism world and legacy media, whatever they want to call us. We'll do our jobs, and try to carry on and be as good as. I don't think anybody can work as hard as Steve Batterson and be as engaged as Bryce Miller, but we'll do our best to make those guys proud. So with that, we'll put this to rest. We didn't get to Pro Day today, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about the NFL draft and those guys that worked out at Pro Day, but we've ran this thing long enough. Lots of men's basketball to talk about, so that's why we dedicated so much time to that. But thanks everybody for listening. Thank you to our sponsors. Scott and I will talk to you next week, and we'll dive into a little bit more X's and O's and on-field football stuff next week. So have a good rest of your week and weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Say goodbye.